Today I've got some tips for you for how to formulate setup phrases for tapping. And I want to share about a client that I had with really high anxiety and a compulsive overeating problem. Now, anxiety is a pervasive feeling of fear, and people with lots of anxiety end up on medications because they just want to avoid the feeling. But that just puts a lid on the feeling and it kind of keeps it trapped inside, so it doesn't get rid of it. And these people will end up in our offices eventually because nothing else has worked for them and they need some resolution. Now, I had a client who I helped with a compulsive eating problem. She had been medicated to address this, and the drugs had helped to stop the panic attacks. And she'd been for counseling and was still going for counseling, and the counseling had helped to some degree, but she couldn't get a handle on the eating. This compulsive eating was really out of control. And because the underlying fear was still there, the drugs hadn't gotten rid of the feeling, they were just masking them. So this is important. Anxiety isn't a feeling, it's a diagnosis. Depression isn't a feeling, it's a diagnosis. If the client's being treated for an issue that has been diagnosed, you need to get a medical referral from their doctor, or at the very least get an agreement that you're going to work on the underlying stress. You are not addressing the diagnosis. As far as we're concerned, the diagnosis is just a label anyway. And we don't work with labels and we don't work with diagnoses. We work with thoughts and feelings and emotions that generate internal stress and drive behavior that can eventually result in a diagnosis. But we don't work on the diagnosis. Labels are helpful sometimes. A lot of people like to get a label. At least when they get a diagnosis, it gives them a reason that satisfies their conscious mind for why they've got the problem. But the subconscious mind is still left wrestling with that unresolved internal conflict. So that's what we want to work with them to resolve. Having a label also helps the client to put some distance between themselves and the fear that's behind all of that. You know, anxiety is generalized fear, and you'll get a lot better results if you're dealing with the specific fear rather than sort of this pervasive generalized feeling. Phobias and panic attacks are what happen when that anxiety comes out to play. So anything that will give the client some distance from that fear gives them a measure of safety. And that's the subconscious mind's prime directive, is safety. So we want to make that our first concern so that we're working with the subconscious mind. Now, when you're working with anxiety, you want to start by using whatever words the client uses. They're most likely going to use the word anxiety. That's fine. It's a place to start. So if they call it anxiety, use that to begin with. But what you want to do is guide them in a way to begin to translate that into an emotion, because anxiety isn't an emotion, it's a diagnosis. So the way that you can translate that into emotional language is by using the setup phrasing for tapping, the EFT setup system. Now, I have 4 objectives when I'm formulating setup statements for the tapping process. They don't necessarily follow this order, but it's always important to work with whatever the client is bringing up in the moment. So you may find that the order changes, but there's these 4 things that I like to cover. And that just makes it a lot more organic if we're just working with whatever's coming up. Now, if you don't use tapping or use EFT in your sessions, you can still use the auto-suggestion process. Just have the client say it and have them focus as they're saying that. You can also just have the client tap on the karate chop Okay, it gives them something to do, and you're stimulating one of the releasing points. Or you can have them rub on these, there's these points, if you poke around on the chest here, there's a couple of kind of tender spots. They're called neurolymphatic release points. They're tied to the lymph system. So rubbing on those will actually help to release some stuff as well. So you can have them rub there while they're doing the autosuggestion process. Or you can have them tap on the collarbone if you want. That's another way. Or you can have them tap on the gamut point, which is this point about between the knuckles of the baby finger and the ring finger, and in between there. So rubbing on that or tapping on that is another thing you can do. Any of those are work. They're very useful. And just incorporating some rubbing or tapping will help to release things much more quickly. Now, my first objective is just to focus on releasing any resistance to feeling the feeling, because that's usually the first thing that is going to be a block. So what I want to do is make the feeling acceptable. You know, people with anxiety do not want to feel it. The last thing they want to do is feel it. They've been trying to avoid it, and that's the problem. So that feeling that they've been trying to avoid is actually a part of them. It's a need that is trying to find a way to express that's going to be heard, so that that underlying need behind that feeling can be met. So trying to avoid the feeling, pushing it down, is really rejecting the feeling, and that is self-rejection, which only adds to the distress. So I like to start with a statement of just taking ownership of the feeling, something like, even though I have this anxiety and it doesn't feel good, I really don't like it. It's my feeling, and I'm allowed to have it, so I accept this feeling. Now, it's just a little bit of acceptance, taking ownership of the feeling. You can't change anything if it doesn't belong to you. You can complain about it all you want, but it's not going to move if you don't own it. You can't heal it if you don't let yourself feel it. So that's the first thing we want to do, get that door open. So I start with acknowledging and accepting the feeling and just giving it permission to be there. Now think about that. If that feeling is a part of that person, I'm speaking to it. Even though I have this feeling and I don't like it, I accept it. Now, the second thing I want to do is just increase the client's general awareness of the feeling. And what that means is amplifying the feeling. I want to bring more of it up into conscious awareness. Now, with intense anxiety, we're talking like borderline panic attacks, you don't want or need to intensify the feeling. There's enough volume there to work with, and the client is already overstimulated. What we want to do is help calm the nervous system of the body, and to do that they just need to be more aware of the body. Okay, the tapping will help to calm the nervous system of the body as well, but they need to become more aware of what's going on in the body. Anxiety is experienced generally in the body, and it's usually felt throughout the body. Kind of an overall sort of antsy feeling is or feeling on edge. That's the most common sense of it. As you focus attention on that feeling, though, what you'll find is that they'll start to target in on a more specific emotion, and that makes it easier to release. So they may have this generalized anxiety throughout the body, but if you're having them focus on the body, you can ask them, well, where do you feel it the most, or where does that feel the worst? And they might say, oh, it's in the gut, or it's in the, it's in my chest, or it's in my throat. Good, focus there. Now you've got something more specific. And then you can have them describe it. They might call it just a pressure, or they might say, oh, it's scared. So you're getting something a little more specific. Then you focus on that. So even though I have this scared feeling or this tight feeling in my body, I accept this feeling. I'm allowed to feel it, and I'm allowed to release it. So I want to give permission now to not only feel it, but to do something with it, because they've owned it. We want to do something with it. And then I might add on to that, if they haven't named an emotion, as they're tapping, I'll say, I feel, put an ending on that. Give me another word for anxious, or give me another word for tight. And if you're lucky, you might actually get an emotion, and that's going to help you just really target the issue. Now, most of the time, the client's going to, they're going to know right away. They're going to say, I feel scared, or I feel afraid, or I feel worried, or something like that. And that's great. Work with that. But any body awareness will do. Just work with what comes up. If it's tension, deal with the tense feeling. If it's tight, you can tap on that. If it's pressure, it's that. Clamping down, whatever words they use, because their words are what's real. That Those words have power for them. So if it's tension, where is the tension? Where are they feeling that? And then validate that. That's that part of them speaking through the body. So it might be this tension and tightness in my gut. And just allow that to be there. Because what's happening is you're getting closer to an authentic emotion, and that is what you want to release on. You want to get down to the scared feeling that's behind that. Now, the third thing I want to do is I want to make the client acceptable despite having the problem. And of course, this is the where we end up with the EFT setup phrase. I want a self-acceptance phrase in there, because the biggest part of the problem is really self-rejection. I have this feeling that makes me unacceptable, and so now there's a self-rejection, and that just adds to the distress. That feeling is a part of them. Keep that in mind. That feeling that's expressing through the body, that feeling that's generalized as anxiety, it's a part of them, and they don't like that part, and they're trying to get rid of it, and that's generating anxiety. You can't get rid of yourself. So when they're rejecting that part of themselves, it only increases the fear, which increases the pressure. So if they say that the feeling is scared, recognize that. That's a scared part, and give it permission to be there. Be its ally. Give it a right to be. So even though I feel scared, and I'm allowed to feel scared, because if I can feel it, I can heal it. So I accept this feeling, and I deeply and completely accept myself. You'll notice that I'm using the title of If I Can Feel It, I Can Heal It. That's a title of a John Gray book. And it's a wonderful statement to use with your clients. What I want to finish up with is a statement of commitment to release the feeling. That's where we're going. We're heading toward giving the client, giving themselves permission to let that feeling go. So you got to own it. You got to validate it, accept it, and give yourself permission to let it go. I want that client to make a statement out loud, an auto-suggestion of their permission to release that feeling and to let it go, because I can't make them do it. It requires a choice from them. So they got to make that consciously. So I might tap on, even though I do feel scared. So there's a validation of the part of them. I do feel scared, and I can feel it in my gut, which is validating where it's expressing. This is my feeling, taking ownership, and I'm allowed to heal it. I'm allowed to feel it. It's my feeling, because I don't have to feel scared for the rest of my life, and I deeply and completely accept myself. So just bringing it all full circle, you can just keep repeating those phrases and whatever works in the moment, in any order. As I say, it doesn't matter what order. Now, with the compulsive eating client, all we did was focus on releasing the anxiety. That's it. We never addressed any behaviors at all. In fact, I just used the behaviors as a way of measuring her progress. And you know, this client had a lot of resistance. In fact, the whole chair was vibrating most of the time we were working. Her legs were going like crazy. So I had to really kind of sneak up on the fear, and this was an approach that really worked for her. Especially that phrase, John Gray's phrase, you know, if I can feel it, I can heal it. She just loved that, so I used it a lot. I just really compounded that one. So as I say, we never worked on a single behavior. All we did was we just addressed the fear, and every week something changed. Her coworkers started to notice changes in her. They didn't know exactly. They just said, "There's something different about you. What are you doing?" And her psychotherapist, who had referred her to me, noticed those changes as well. And so she continued to come in and continued to see changes. Now, she was really skeptical, you know, even though there were, you know, these shifts happening, she was still very skeptical. And we really only did about a half a dozen sessions together, and we got enough relief and enough release that she went back to counseling. She was very committed to her counselor and really loved her counselor, and that's where she wanted to do the bulk of the work. So as it turned out, I never actually knew what the final results were, because all we did was worked on releasing the fear. So about a year later, I was out walking at one of my most favorite places on the planet, Westwood Lake, and there's a long path that goes all the way around the lake, and it's just beautiful here on the west coast of Canada on Vancouver Island. And so I was walking around the lake with a friend, and this strange little woman came up to me and gave me this big hug, and I'm going like, who is this person? And she starts talking to my friend and saying, oh, hi. And she's telling this person, my friend that I was walking with, how I had changed her life. And I'm like, I have no idea who she is. I didn't recognize her because she had lost 50 pounds. And when it finally occurred to me, I think when she introduced herself to my friend and said her name, then it was like, oh my God, that's who you are. And what she said was that her addiction to sugar was completely gone. She had been self-medicating with sugar, which, by the way, sugar calms anxiety. If you don't know that, you do now. So she was out walking her dog, and she said she was doing this every day. She was going around the lake, which is about a 5-mile hike around the lake, every day with her dog. All her health concerns and worries were behind her. She had been facing the specter of diabetes. All her levels were down to normal. She changed completely, and was this thin, beautiful, very happy little woman that I ran into on the lake. So this is just a great example of something that Parkhill said. And he said that, you know, often the work that we do is planting trees in whose shade we will never have the pleasure of sitting. We often don't know what the long-term results are of the work that we do. So that's it for this time. That's 4 tapping tips for creating acceptable setup phrases to make it easier for you to get those feelings up and get them out, make it easier on your client, work in a more client-centered way. Be sure to leave your comments or your questions on the forum. I want to hear from you. And until next time, I'm Wendie signing off. See you again soon.